I'm happy to be able to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Deborah Savage. She is one of the co-founders of the Siena Symposium, which is a co-sponsor of this day's event. But she's also a member of the faculty at the St. Paul's Seminary School of Divinity here at the University of St. Thomas, where she teaches philosophy and theology, and where she does all manner of important things. And I have no idea what the list is, but I know it's long. She is a true John Paul II scholar and has written widely on Christian feminism and on the nature of man and woman as revealed in Scripture, and I know you're going to love to hear from her this morning. Please welcome Dr. Deborah Savage.
I see my fan club came today. So, members of it, you've probably heard some of my jokes that I am going to tell some. I'll let you know when I have in case you don't get them. But you have to laugh at them even though you've heard them before, because otherwise no one will understand. Okay. All right. So I want to start by thanking everyone, absolutely everyone here, for coming today and for your willingness, indeed your courage, for braving the weather and the certain challenge of parking at UST in order to join in on this conversation. And if you were not aware of the controversy that surrounded these questions, the questions that concern us here today, you've probably been in a cave for the last few years, but you're certainly aware of them now. And so I'm grateful to you and all of our sponsors, especially the University of St. Thomas, for the opportunity to consider what surely must be the question of our era, the nature of man and woman. We can also be grateful to Mr. Heyer and Ms. Carter for their witness and Dr. Anderson for his lucid account of the situation in which we find ourselves in these days. It is undeniable that the question of what it means to be a man or a woman simply cannot be taken for granted any longer. Things that seemed self-evident, really for centuries, are under dispute. But here I need to make it explicit that at this point in our proceedings, we're making a bit of a transition. For the remainder of the day, we will be less concerned with the particulars of the controversy and more focused on our real intention today, which is and has been from the start to offer a constructive account of what philosophy, theology, and science reveal to us about the nature of man and woman. The Church puts it this way: what truly was God's purpose in creating us male and female? Now let us acknowledge from the start that the contours of this question go well beyond these most recent controversies. One need only to look around for the signs. The confusion that characterizes the relationships between men and women in the contemporary period is playing out before our eyes on college campuses, in the media, in the film industry, in the halls of our nation's capital. From the suffragettes of the last century to contemporary feminism, from Mad Men, I never really saw it, but I heard about it, to the fall of Harvey Weinstein, from chastity as the norm to the hookup culture and rising divorce rates. It is simply undeniable that we are uncertain now about who we are and how we relate to one another. I believe I have an explanation. To get the whole story, you will have to buy my book. I'll let you know when it comes out. But I will do my best to sketch it for you here today. So as some of you know, the question of man and woman is one I've been pursuing in my own research for many years, and I am overjoyed at the opportunity to present to you some of my discoveries. But here's what I must report first of all, and that is that I have come to the conclusion that our difficulty can be traced to the fact that there actually has never been an adequate and robust account, anthropological account, of the nature of man and woman, of the nature of woman in relation to man. There's never been an adequate account. Think about that. We have never really dug down into the anthropology of men and women. We might know a lot about man per se, but we don't really know much about man and woman thought of together. Now, some would think that John Paul II provided that in the Theology of the Body, but he really doesn't. He gets started, but his purpose in that volume is the language of the body. And he says in the seventh audience that he has no intention of pursuing these anthropological questions, metaphysically especially, any further. So the need remains for a theory adequately grounded in a comprehensive framework that affirms the humanity of both man and woman, accounts for their differences philosophically, theologically, and scientifically, and permits us to make a coherent claim regarding what constitutes their specific and distinct charisms. That is what I have been working on and what I hope to present to you today. But before we speak of the particular identities of man and woman, I would like to begin with their context. And that is something that Dr. Anderson referred to already. It's what St. John Paul II referred to as complementarity. Now, I used to give talks on something called the feminine genius. Have you heard about that? John Paul wrote about that, right? It's an absolutely undeniable phenomenon, something anyone with a mom basically knows about. Okay, work with me. Okay. We would have lots of fun, especially when wine was included in the gathering, agreeing on how smart we are and so on. This is when I'm giving talks on the feminine genius. But I have learned that to speak of the feminine genius without a concomitant and full recognition of the genius of man is to risk creating a distortion in our understanding of what it means to be human. It definitely risks what Sister Prudence Allen describes as gender polarity, where one gender is considered superior to the other. As Ryan mentioned, for much of history, we've thought of man as superior to woman, and it's not going to help us if we simply reverse that. We have to understand in what way we are equal, not interchangeable, but equal in dignity, and in what way we are different. The feminine genius cannot be understood apart from the genius of man, and the emphasis that has been placed on it these past few years, while understandable and important, has at times seemed to tend toward its own brand of Catholic feminism, leaving men in some kind of theological limbo. In any case, St. John Paul tells us in Christi Fidelis Laici, and this is a quote, "The condition that will assure the rightful presence of woman in the church and in society is a more penetrating and accurate consideration of the anthropological foundation for masculinity and femininity." And so that is what I have been working on. Now, I would never really question the Pope. Bishops, I'm not going to suggest. And I think I would follow any direction that Pope Francis gives, but I actually don't think it's a good idea to pursue a theology of women. I've been hoping he would call me. I check my cell phone regularly so that I could explain this to him. I wrote a paper on the masculine genius that was sent to the Vatican, but I haven't heard from him yet. But if he calls, I will tell him that what we need, Holy Father, what we really need is a theology of complementarity, and that is what I've been working on. It turns out to be absolutely essential to John Paul's entire project. He tells us in many places that the complementarity that characterizes the nature of man and woman is what allows each person to experience interpersonal and reciprocal relationship as a gift. And we know that the theme of self-gift runs like a backbone throughout the late Holy Father's entire corpus. But what may not be so widely recognized is that in his letter to women, he goes a bit further. He tells us that this complementarity, this relational uniduality, as he puts it in his own inimitable way, actually constitutes our mission. The complementarity that characterizes our relationship is our mission. It gives us our mission. He states, to this unity of the two, God has entrusted not only the work of procreation and family life, but the creation of history itself. Here we learn that the unity that arises from the relationship of a man and a woman is found not only in the marital act and our natural capacity to create life. Men and women do not just make families together, we make history together. It is quite significant that his claim is also included in the Compendium on the Church's social teaching. It can only mean that the final end toward which our creation as two equal but differentiated human beings is ordered ultimately toward the realization of the Church's entire social vision. Now, the nature of the self-gift that characterizes the marital act is certainly at the foundations of human history. It is the primordial way in which we cooperate with the creative action of God, and unquestionably our point of entry into history. Indeed, as John Paul tells us in Love and Responsibility, through the marital act, we participate in the very transmission of existence itself. That's pretty big. Participate in the transmission of existence, that's a very big deal. That's God's thing, right? But it is the second dimension of complementarity that I would like to also explore with you here. We need to understand much, much better how this relational uniduality is to inform our mission to create human history, because clearly we have not been doing a terribly good job of that. Now, in a few minutes, we'll jump into an exploration of complementarity itself, considering first what it means to say we are equal, and then what makes us different. And then we'll turn our attention to something that I hope will interest you. I'll give you an account of both the masculine and feminine genius. And there is one, men. It's right here in my notes. I give these talks sometimes, and men will call up and say, "Is it okay if I come?" But I want to start with philosophy, not with philosophy or theology, not with the theoretical, but with just one example from the realm of lived human experience, and with a very brief look at what the science says. Our other speakers are going to cover that thoroughly, but this will give us a common starting place. My husband, Andrew, and I, whom I'm proud to say is somewhere in the audience, hi, honey, wherever you are, we have a monthly faith meeting with a group of adult men and women held at an old church close to downtown St. Paul. It was a few years ago, we were meeting at St. Vincent de Paul's. We have a holy hour. We go down to the basement for a meeting. A few years ago, during the fall, we walked down to have our meeting, and saints preserve us, there's a bat flying around the room. Now, you got to picture this room. It's very big. And there's one table in the middle of the room, one of those kind of long rectangular ones. The basic, church table. And I kid, except if you're at, Our Lady of Grace, I guess. Whoa, sorry. Forget I said that. It was just a little joke. Okay, so I'm not kidding, within 2 nanoseconds, not even 2 seconds, 2 nanoseconds, all the women in the group were underneath that table, including my daughter Maddie, who was, I think, 10 or 11 at the time, underneath that table with our hands over our heads. No discussion, no flip charts, what shall we do? In the same 2 nanoseconds, what were the men doing? They were looking for tools. They found brooms, mops, they found garbage bags, dustpans, garbage cans. And within not too long, working together, they captured the bat. That is one of the best examples that I have of the way in which men and women work together. And of course, at when they finally captured the bat, what do the women say? "Oh my gosh, don't kill the poor thing." Okay. So I don't mean to imply that the women couldn't have caught the bat and all that stuff, but I'm pretty sure that this particular group of women would have ceded the room to the bat. And we would have gone to the nearest coffee shop and called up the maintenance guy and said, by the way, maintenance guy, by the way, there's a bat in your basement. Yeah. Okay. So maybe unusual example, but very telling. And the feminists in our culture will tell you that it is all a matter of conditioning, not anything inherent to who we are as embodied persons, although I would just point out that it was 2 nanoseconds, and that split was immediate, right? There was no planning, there was no meeting. It happened. Okay. But here is an example from a world away, and certainly not funny. Did you know that when the aid workers deliver supplies to the poor and starving and famine-stricken areas in Africa, they will only give them to the women? Because the men sell the supplies on the black market, but the women take them back to the villages to feed the children and the elderly. And if John Paul were here, he would say, but of course, they're meant to be mothers to the world, right? So it is not enough to explain this away with social conditioning. Here is what the science actually says, and let's be clear about one thing in particular. Researchers report that boys and girls exhibit male and female personality traits from the day they are born. It is on the record that there are scientists of both sexes who began their research secure in the conviction that they would demonstrate that these traits are a result of socialization. They had to change their tune when the data revealed it to be otherwise. One researcher called people like that childless. These are people without children yet. There were scientists who became parents who began to raise their children, determined to avoid any hint of the dreaded stereotyping, set it up completely differently. I'm not really sure what that means. Maybe no pink blankets, no blue ones, no ribbons, no tiny football jerseys, something, I don't know. In the end, they were forced to admit that male newborns behave like boys and female newborns behave like girls right from the start. Guess what? Female babies are judged to be more sensitive, the males to be stronger. I was telling my mom about this research not that long ago, and she goes, why didn't they just call me? It would have saved you a lot of money. How much money do they get for that? So here's just a few examples of what has been scientifically demonstrated. Baby girls look at faces. Baby boys look at objects. They look at the mobile above his head. The girl will look at your face. And she'll look at your face longer if you talk to her. It won't make any difference to the boys. Hold on now, I know you think that's funny. In contrast to one-day-old male babies, one-day-old baby girls respond to the sound of human distress. 1 day old, they already can distinguish an infant's cry from other noise. Boys cannot. 4-month-old girls recognize people they know from photographs, not the boys. When new toys are introduced into a nursery school, the boys drop what they are doing and go see. The girls do the same when the new children arrive. Yeah. No matter what you give a boy to play with, he will make a truck or sword out of it. Even Barbie dolls. He'll have armies of Barbie dolls. Right? Little girls will wrap almost anything in a blanket and carry it around like a baby. And the evidence of this shows up across cultures. Across the world, the babysitters are girls. Girls show more interest in babies, boys are more interested in other things. Right? So when we find ourselves in a situation where people feel threatened by the suggestion that men and women are different, we can be confident that the church's teaching on complementarity is not some plot hatched by the patriarchy, only intended to subvert women or return them to slavery or something. In what follows, we will see that Scripture reveals what science is only just discovering, that man and woman are fundamentally equal but constitute different and complementary ways of being in the world. I should put my glasses on. Okay. I think what I say next will make clear how closely aligned these two accounts from separate disciplines, science and theology, seem to be. We are on the right track, for without question, God is the author of all truth. Let me explain why I'm using these, because if I don't, we'll be here all day. I have to stick to my script. Okay, so here we are, the nature of woman in relation to man. As is probably well known to this audience, John Paul grounds both his theology of the body and his account of complementarity in the first 2 chapters of Genesis. I've been pondering these 2 creation accounts for over 10 years, looking into the meaning of the original language, considering other interpretations, praying about them, sort of thinking about them incessantly. And this has led me to some new insights into these texts that I think will interest you. Just a few general comments of these 2 accounts as standalone texts are in order before we look at them together. First of all, it is important to note that although we always thought of the main characters as Adam and Eve, only Eve is ever actually named, and even then, not until after the fall. They are referred to in the first account by the word Adam, which comes from the word Adamah, or earth. And in the original language, Hebrew, Adam is a reference to man in the collective sense, what the philosophers would call man per se, or man as such. Human being is made in the image of God. Secondly, when the sacred author states male and female, he created them, it is essential to realize that the words in the original Hebrew, zakar and nekeva, are not nouns. They are adjectives. They describe man as such. Man as such is created. Active and receptive is a better way to put it, because masculine and feminine has all these connotations. There's an active principle and a receptive principle, and man as such possesses both capacities. So it doesn't mean that man per se is created both male and female. That would be incoherent. But it does mean that man as such has the capacity for relationality built right into him. Just a further specification of the received tradition that man is made in God's image and therefore is in his very nature built for relationship. So what shows up when you consider what this means is that both man and woman simply must be understood to be absolutely equal, not interchangeable. Equal is a problematic term because in math it means interchangeable. We don't mean that here. What it really means is that they both possess human nature in its full expression. Both instantiations of the same substantial form is how the philosophers would put it, equally endowed with intellect, will, and freedom. So the first account establishes that man and woman are equal. The second account is a little more complicated. It's a little more philosophical language than we can probably absorb here, so I'll keep it simple. But in the second account, we begin to see what differentiates them. Here we find a very different description of the creation of man and woman. At Genesis 2:22, Eve is made or built, banach is the word, out of one of the man's ribs, and both God and the man are finally content that a proper helper has been found. Now here's something very, very important. We will return to it, but this is the first time in the text that the sacred author refers to man and woman as Ish and Isha. Ish and Isha are references to individual, concretely existing persons. Adam is fashioned from Adamah, from the earth. Eve is made from Tselah, the rib, and a different word is used to describe her coming into being. We'll come back to that in a moment. But I'm just going to have to count on your good faith. I won't have the time to prove it to you, but I'll tell you what the second account shows. Both the man and the woman are made from different matter, right? Right? Can we buy that? Right? Man is made from clay, and woman is made from man. So first, though the matter appears to be the principle of differentiation, individually existing persons cannot be reduced to the matter of which they are made, because our essence is a composite of body and soul. And so, though one of the things that differentiates me from man is the matter of which I am made, since I am composed of both body and soul, and since my soul is meant for me, I am in some essential way a woman. My womanness does not reside in me merely in the matter of which I am made. It is who I am, as John Paul II states, both physically and ontologically. Think of it this way. In philosophy, we have this concept of the accident, right? An accident is something inheres in a substance. If this were class, I'd make you answer the question, but that's okay. I have blue eyes. That's an accident of the matter. If I had brown eyes, I'd still be me, right? It wouldn't make particle of difference to my essence. But gender, in the Thomistic account, is an inseparable accident that is attributable to the composite of both soul and body. I go to heaven as a girl, not some androgynous thing, right? That's true. Okay. So you can derive this conclusion, though, directly from the scriptural account if you look at it through the lens of Thomas's anthropology. So the point here is that men and women are equal, composite creatures, differentiated by the matter of which they are made. This is true of both of them. And thus we have from Scripture proof that neither the male nor the female of the species can be considered normative for the species. Men and women are differentiated by the matter of which they are made, though both are composites of body and soul. The point is, men, the thing that, the kind of creature that man is precisely the same kind of creature that woman is. You follow me? This is what the feminists are worried about. We've thought all this time, since Aristotle confused us about it, that man is normative for the species. But that's not right. Men and women are both equally human, differentiated by the matter of which they are made, but instantiations in different matter of the same human nature. Women have the same intellectual capacities that men do. So I know I haven't proven it to you. You can ask me questions later. So the point of this, though, is that I don't have to act like a man to be considered human. And men don't have to act like women to be considered human. We have two equally human but differentiated ways of being in the world. We are equal, though that does not make us interchangeable. We are even equal in the way we are different. So that is the backstory. Now we'll look at the scriptural accounts more broadly. And the first point of interest begins in Genesis 1, where the sacred author seems to lay out a particular hierarchical order in which we see God clearly creates. God begins with the heaven and the earth, then light. He divides the waters. I'm sure you have all this memorized. There's sea monsters show up eventually, swarms of living creatures, etc. This all culminates in the creation of Adam, human nature created masculine and feminine, or if you prefer, active and receptive. This is clearly a hierarchy on its way up, right? From sea monsters to man per se, okay? The second account also indicates a sort of hierarchy, for there we read at 2:7 that the man, now referred to in the Hebrew as Ha-Adam, that is, the male at the level of the species, is fashioned from the dust of the earth. And now, as we know, every God and the man notice that he is alone, and God forms every creature and brings them to the man to be named, then realizing that none of these creatures correspond to man's own being, and that it is not good for him to be alone, decides it's necessary to make a fitting helper, ezer kenegdo is the language, for him, puts him into a deep sleep, and forms the woman from the man's rib. And John Paul says that at that point, man recognizes in Eve another person, a being equal to himself, a someone, not a something, a someone he can love, to whom he can make of himself a gift, and who can reciprocate in kind. Fairly straightforward. But there are several additional and important points to glean from considering these two chapters together. First of all, it is only when we come to the making of woman that we see the final significance of the order introduced in the first account and brought to completion in the second. Man is made from the earth, but woman is made from man. And though it has troubled feminists forever, and is arguably at the beginning point of the historical misinterpretation of this passage, the fact that woman is created second is not to make her subservient. Because here's the point. Woman is not created second, she is created last and on the way up. She is, in fact, made on the way up, the last creature to appear, a creature made not from earth, but from something that arguably already contains greater actualization than dust or clay. I don't know why it took 3,000 years for someone to... Man is made from the earth, but woman is made from man. So it is certainly plausible to suggest that she is made of finer stuff. And science certainly can tell from just a few DNA cells whether or not what they are looking at is a man or a woman. Women are said to be more sensitive, right? Okay, so this is a little controversial, but at least minimally we can say that because of the order suggested by reading the accounts together, woman can be seen as the pinnacle of creation, not as a creature whose place in that order is subservient or somehow less in stature than that of man. For with the creation of woman, the reality of human community is introduced into the world. There simply is no human community without the appearance of woman. This proposition is reinforced when we consider that the Hebrew word usually translated as helper is azer, and actually does not mean servant or slave. They would have used a different word if that's what they meant. When this word is used elsewhere in Scripture, it has the connotation of divine aid, especially in the Psalms. Used here to express helper or partner, it is a word that indicates someone who is most definitely not a slave or even remotely subservient. There is the sense of an equal, a partner, help sent by God. Thus, woman is not built to be his servant, but someone who can help him to live. This is what I say when I talk to married couples. Woman, your job is to help the man to live. Yeah. I have to use this little story because Bishop LeVoir might remember years ago he did our marriage preparation. And I asked the $64,000 question as I tried to get Andrew to cooperate with me as we prepared for the wedding. How does the woman get the man to do what she knows needs to be done without seeming like a nag? That is the $64,000 question. And Father LeVoir at the time, you probably don't remember, but it was the start of everything for me. So this is your fault. He said, well, what you have to remember is that the woman's job is to keep in mind the life of the family. The woman has the higher vision, the larger vision. And I know Andrew and I were both expecting him to quote Ephesians 5 or something, you know. No. And did you know that women have better peripheral vision than men? Have you ever wondered how it is that moms can remember where you left your backpack or your socks or your wallet or your cell phone or your keys? Or we literally have better peripheral vision. Yeah. That's indisputable. Okay. But we can't get too cocky about that, right? Yeah, we have to be willing to share our gifts. Right, honey? Yeah, okay. Okay, so in case anyone's getting worried, though, it's immediately essential to note the full text is azer kenegdo. Kenegdo is a preposition that means in front of, in the side of, before in the spatial sense. And so we must recognize that while Eve is not below Adam in the order of creation, neither is she above him. She stands in front of him, before him, meeting his gaze, as it were, and sharing in the responsibility for the preservation of all that precedes them. After all, at Genesis 1:27, both male and female are given the command to subdue the earth and fill it. So the nature of woman in relation to man is finally clear. Woman and man are equally possessed of intellect, will, and freedom, but they are also, in a sense, equal in their difference, because while both are composites of body and soul, they are distinguished by the matter of which they are made. Both are characterized by a capacity for action and receptivity, while placed face to face in the order of creation, but as complements of one another. Both equally responsible for filling the earth and subduing it, but somehow tasked with somewhat different missions, and as we shall see, a particular genius that belongs uniquely to them. There is a little more to be grasped from the text than this, and so we'll turn our attention to what we can discover about the nature of the masculine and feminine genius. So I have 10 minutes, and I'll try to pull it off. I'm going to start with man because he's first in the order of creation. First, it is notable that man is apparently in the garden alone with God for some period before the appearance of woman, something that has important implications for the place he occupies in the created order and the traditional understanding of man as the head of the household. I'm working on that now. But aside from this special relationship with the Creator, it can be said that man's first contact with reality is of a horizon that otherwise contains only lower creatures, what we might call things, or for the Latin scholars, the res. Yeah, that's thing in Latin. It has a real weight. This is what leads God to conclude that the man is incomplete and alone, and ultimately leads to the building of woman. Here's my point. Man's orientation toward things, which we've been laughing about, is clearly a part of God's design. In fact, it may provide a point of departure in Scripture for the well-documented evidence that men seem more naturally oriented toward things than toward persons. Man is tasked with naming all the things God brings him, including woman, and it is in naming them that he takes dominion over them. Aquinas himself argues that man must have received a distinct preternatural gift in order to make it possible for him to name everything God brought him. Think about that. How would he have known? He would have had to see into the nature of things to give them the name that belonged to them. He had some kind of direct knowledge of them and possessed a certain familiarity and sophistication with them. It thus can be said that man knows things in ways that woman simply does not. And it is here that we come to the core of what I propose is man's genius. He learns that he excels at discovering what things are, how they are to be distinguished from one another, and what they are for. This is his gift. Anybody have trouble getting their husband to come in from the garage for dinner? Oh, that's just me. He's out there with his things. Andrew says, no, that tool doesn't go there. That goes in that box. They look the same to me, right? There's so many examples. This is his gift. And I would argue that it is man's capacity to name things, to determine what can be predicated of something and what cannot, and an ability to arrive at a systematic way of judging the matter that constitutes the gift that men bring to the tasks of human living. Adam's the only one who gets a job. He's put in the garden to till it and keep it. So this is his work. The genius of man is found in his capacity to know and to use the goods of the earth in the service of authentic human flourishing. I want to just mention briefly in passing that this does not mean that he is somehow disordered. An orientation toward things is not necessarily a disorder, because he knows, for example, that woman is not a thing. He knows how to tell the difference. It's because of the fall, which I probably won't have time to cover. Because of the fall that men these days seem to treat everything like an object, right? Yeah, okay. Because when the woman is brought to him, he recognizes another being just like himself, right? Flesh of my flesh, bone of my bones. So the contemporary dissatisfaction with the tendency of man to attend to things more than to people completely overlooks the fact that the things of creation also have ontological status. That masculine inclination toward things and their uses is an aspect of the charism of men, and in many ways accounts for the building up of human civilization, has led throughout history to human flourishing, and has made and still makes possible the preservation of families and of culture. The truth is that if it weren't for men, we would still be living in caves. The proper response to the manifestation of the genius of men is not ridicule or resentment, but gratitude. And I want to express that to you now. There's toxic masculinity, I guess, but we have to see it in light of original sin, right? We need to help each other overcome our sinfulness. Okay, quickly, to woman, the feminine genius. In contrast to man, and of special significance, is the quite legitimate claim that since woman comes into existence after man, her first contact with reality is of a horizon that from the beginning includes man. That is, it includes persons. Women, from the moment of their creation, have always lived in a world inhabited by others. Now, John Paul II says that the feminine genius is grounded in the fact that women are meant to be mothers. I affirm that. There's plenty of evidence of that, both spiritual and physical, right? But I argue that there's a prior point of departure for that theory, and it's right there in the garden. When woman appears, the first thing she sees is Adam's face, right? So we've never lived in a world that is not inhabited by persons. And I'd say this explains a lot, like why it is that women seem to know from the beginning they're meant for relationship, where it takes men a little longer to figure out that something is missing, right? When I talk with college women who say, should I call him? I don't know. We have these very long discussions about that. Well, anyway, I can't go down that rabbit hole, but so I would say this exegetical insight seems to provide a starting place in Scripture for the equally well-documented phenomenon that women seem more naturally oriented toward persons. The genius of woman is found here. While man's first experience of his own existence is of loneliness, woman's horizon is different right from the start. From the first moment of her own reality, woman sees herself in relation to the other. Now, the fall will result in a disorder in this inclination. Her desire will now be for a relationship with man, even when she knows he is using her as an object. But the preceding analysis has shown that this capacity to include the other is not a lesser quality. It's not something that only unnecessarily complicates things, diverting us from an otherwise clear line of sight to achieving results. Nor does it compromise women's fundamental intelligence or competence or ability to get things done. Woman's genius is to keep constantly before us the fact that the existence of living persons, whether in the womb or walking around outside of it, cannot be forgotten while we frantically engage in the tasks of human living. Woman is responsible for reminding us all that all human activity is to be ordered toward authentic human flourishing. So I have some things I would love to tell you about the fall, but we'll skip it. I just want to make one thing clear about it. Why did the serpent approach Eve? Because she was naive and stupid? No, I've shown that she couldn't have been. Same in substantial form, instantiation of the same substantial form, intellect, will, and freedom, fully aware, etc. He went to Eve because if you go to the top of a hierarchy, you get all of it. He was very clever. And women we've lost our place in this culture, and it's going to be up to us, as John Paul II says in Evangelium Vitae 99, and it's up to women to construct a new feminism that avoids all forms of male domination, etc. If you want to visit the Siena Symposium table, I have the quote written out. It's up to us. We're key in the recovery of our culture. So in conclusion, let me conclude by reminding us all of what is at stake here. This has been an attempt to articulate an understanding of man and woman, one that seems to conform not only to Scripture and the received tradition of our intellectual heritage, but also to science and human experience. It was not an attempt to explain the experience of every person here, only to suggest a direction for one's own investigation into the meaning of one's own personhood. We are all in front of the great mystery of what it means to be human. All of us are in front of the question, what possible reason our Creator could have had for creating us the way He did? And I would offer that this is each person's mission here today, to discover the purpose for which I was born. And as St. Catherine of Siena said so long ago, become who you were meant to be, and you will set the world on fire. Thank you for your kind attention.